11.6, 4x times x minus 5 equals 0. Anytime you're multiplying two parentheses that are equal to 0, you know that one of those parentheses has got to be 0. So the way that we would work this out is we'd say 4x must be 0 or x minus 5 must be equal to 0. And then once you've done that, you just work it out algebraically. On the left here, we divide 4 on both sides, and that would tell us that x is equal to 0 divided by 4, which is 0. On the right equation, we'd add 5, and that would get the x by itself. X is equal to 5. So you'll enter both of those answers in for a problem like that. Number 2, similar sort of thing. We've got one parentheses butted up against another parentheses, so we're multiplying the two parentheses, and they're equal to 0. So in this case, 5x plus 8 equals 0, or x plus 5 equals 0. Then just go through your steps. We subtract 8 to get rid of the 8, and that leaves 5x on the left equal to negative 8, and then divide 5 to get the x by itself. So x equals negative 8 over 5. Don't put that as a decimal, just as a fraction reduced. And then on the right, subtract 5. X equals negative 5. So two answers on these. Number 3, x plus 4 in parentheses times x plus 18 in parentheses equals negative 49. I put a little star out to the left of this just so you do notice that we're not equaling to 0 here. So if you've got two parentheses equal to 0, pretty straightforward to solve it. But if it's equal to something else, if it's equal to negative 49, you'll want to FOIL. And then we're going to set it equal to 0, and then we're going to factor after that. So foiling the parentheses means we're going to take first times first, the outers, and then the inners, and then the last. So x times x is x squared, x times 18 is 18x, 4 times x is 4x, and then 4 times 18 is 72. All that equal to negative 49. So I'm going to go ahead and put our like terms together, the 18 and the 4x. And then I'm going to bring over this 49. That's the setting equal to 0 part. We're going to 0 this out on the right. So we've got x squared plus 22x plus 121 equals 0. And then with that trinomial that we've got on the left, we've had a bit of experience factoring trinomials into two parentheses. Make sure you bring down the equals to 0 part. So x and x at the front of both of those parentheses. We do have plus and plus in the trinomial, so we can put plus and plus there. Then you need two things that multiply to be 121, and since there's a 1 out in front of the x squared, they'll multiply to be 121, and then they'll also add to be 22. So maybe you know already that 121 is the same as 11 times 11, which does happen to add to 22. Once you've done that, you've got your two parentheses equal to 0, so we will say x plus 11 equals 0. And then you could say or x plus 11 equals 0 again, but that's redundant. We don't need to say it twice. X plus 11 equals 0. And then we'll just work that out. So in this case, we'll just end up with one answer. Subtract 11. Number 4, 5x squared equals 13x minus 6. And here they break your answers into a step 1 and a step 2. Step 1 might be a little confusing in the way they word it, using the standard form ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0 and so on. Basically, all they want you to do is set equal to 0 and then factor it. And then the factored part, your two parentheses, is what you're going to put in that box. And I'll illustrate that here. So first we're going to set it equal to 0. So we're going to subtract 13x. And by the way, you're going to want to move everything to the x squared side. So if the x squared is on the left, we'll move the 13x over. We'll move the negative 6 over. So subtract 13x. And then in order to move the negative 6 over, we're going to add it. So on the right, 13x minus 13x, negative 6 plus 6 cancels out. Make sure you do that on both sides, adding 6. So we've got 5x squared minus 13x plus 6 equals 0 on the right. And be careful on the left that you don't, when you move everything over, that you don't combine anything that's not like terms. So x squared and x terms, they don't combine to make negative 8 or anything like that. These are separate terms, so we should end up with a trinomial. Next, we're going to factor that. So 2 parentheses equal to 0. First thing in both those parentheses has got to multiply to be 5x squared. So you know you're going to have x and x. And then 2 things that multiply to be 5. Not a lot to choose from, 5 and 1. And then the 2 things that multiply to be 6, that could be 1 and 6, could be 2 and 3. Going to plug these in, and then we'll go ahead and check it. We'll do that underline multiplying thing since the coefficient of x squared isn't 1. So I'm going to put in 2 and 3, and maybe we'll get lucky and this will work out in the first try. So multiplying in the middle, 2 times 1. Multiplying on the outside, 5 times 3, we get 15. And you could get negative 13 if the 15 is negative. So I'm just going to plug this in, but I'm going to have to warn you here in a second about a mistake that could be really easy to make. So we need negative 15 in order to get negative 13. So put in the minus with the 3, since 5 times negative 3 is going to give us negative 15. And then we'll need the 2 to be positive, so we'll put a plus there. So that seems to work out, and you might, if you're being a little hasty, you might go forward with that. It's a really easy mistake to make, but what should happen with this term and this term, these should still multiply to be positive 6, but 2 and 3 do, but 2 and negative 3 do not multiply to be positive 6. They actually multiply to be negative 6. So this seems like it works out, but it actually doesn't. The signs either need to be both positive or both negative if you're going to get a positive 6. And they're not going to be both positive because they have to add, we're going to add to be negative 13 in the middle. So this actually does not work out. But what you can do, still going with the 2 and the 3, is put the 3 first and the 2 second. If this still doesn't work, then we'll move on to the 1 and the 6. But we'll try the numbers underneath. 3 times 1, 5 times 2. We can get 13 out of that, negative 13 if they're both negative. So when we put the signs up above, both negative, negative 3 and negative 2 do still multiply to be positive 6. So this works out. So once you've got that equal to 0, then you can just set 5x minus 3 equal to 0, or x minus 2 equal to 0. And I should mention, back to the step 1 thing, once you've got this factored, this is going to be your step 1, your 2 parentheses. And by the way, you just leave off the 1 in front of the x. Without the circle around the 3 and around the 2, by the way. So that's step 1. And then your step 2 is just what we'll do here, solving it below. So add 3. 5x equals 3, divide 5. X equals 3/5. And then add 2. And by the way, for this box, you'll just enter those in with a comma, 3/5, comma 2. And that's basically how we're going to go through solving the rest of them. We'll get everything on the x squared side. We'll factor. The two parentheses that we factor will be your step 1, and then we'll solve it from there, setting everything equal to 0. Number 5, 6x squared minus 5x minus 7 equals negative 8. So add 8 to both sides. Negative 7 plus 8 gives you a positive 1. Going to factor that, and this is going to end up being your answer for step 1 once we do get it factored. So first thing in both of those is going to have to multiply to be 6x squared. X and x we know for sure. 6 could be a few different things though. 6 could be 1 and 6. Could be 2 and 3. We'll start with 2 and 3. Just because they're closer. And typically they'll give you trinomials that work out to where you got the closer numbers. And then the last two things have to multiply to be 1. Pretty easy, has to be 1 and 1. Underneath, if you multiply 1 times 3, 2 times 1, you get 2. And it is possible to get negative 5 if both of them are negative. Negative 3 and negative 2 does add to be negative 5. So that means both signs up top will be negative. And just take a second, like the last one, to make sure this isn't one of those deceptive looking ones. Negative 1 times negative 1 does still give you positive 1. Okay, so that would be your step 1 answer. And then your step 2, you're just taking each parentheses and setting them equal to 0. 2x minus 1 equals 0, or 3x minus 1 equals 0. So x equals 1/2. On the right side, we're going to add 1. 3x equals 1. Divide by 3. X equals 1/3. So again, you'll have a separate box for that, step 2. And you'll put in 1/2, comma, 1/3. Number 6, negative 18x squared equals 8x. So I'm going to start off by setting it equal to 0. So this 8x, we're going to move to the x squared side. And they're not like terms, so they should stay separate. And on the left, so what's different than some of the examples we've looked at before is we had a trinomial on the left, which would factor into 2 parentheses. Here we've got a binomial, which you'll want to check to see if there's a greatest common factor. In this case, there is. You can take an x out of both terms. You can also take out a negative 2 since they're both even. So we'll do that. We'll take out a negative 2 and an x, and then we'll rewrite what's left when we've done that. So negative 18 divided by negative 2 would give you 9. We took out an x, so that leaves an x. And then negative 8x, when you divide out the negative 2, negative 8 divided by negative 2 actually gives you a positive 4. Since we took out an x, there's no x there. Still equal to 0. And then once you've done that, this will be your step 1. And your step 2 involves doing mainly what we did before. You've got 2 things that are multiplying equal to 0. So one of them, either the 2x or the 9x plus 4, has got to be 0. So either negative 2x equals 0 or 9x plus 4 equals 0. Divide by negative 2. X equals 0. Subtract 4 on both sides. 9x equals negative 4, and then divide 9. Make sure you reduce any of these fractions if you can. 4 and 9 don't have anything in common. So number 7, 9x squared equals 64. Start out by setting it equal to 0. Subtract 4 on both sides. So we've got 9x squared minus 64 equals 0 now on the right. And so if it's a trinomial, you'll factor into 2 parentheses. If it's a binomial, you'll check to see if there's a greatest common factor. Can't take x out of both of these terms. 9 and 64 don't have anything in common. So no greatest common factor. If it's not that, then you'll want to check difference of squares. Binomials can be a few different things when you're factoring them. Difference of squares, difference of cubes, sum of cubes. In this particular section, though, you're unlikely to see cubes, but difference of squares will come up. And in future algebra courses, difference of squares is something that you'll see fairly often. So you want to get to where you recognize it fairly easily. But 9 is a square of 3. 64 is the square of 8. Difference just means subtraction. So we've got a minus in between 2 squares. This is the difference of squares. So the formula for that, a minus b times a plus b. A is just the square root of the first term, which would be 3, and then the square root of x squared would just be x. And b, I mentioned before, square root of 64 is 8. So if you can determine what a and b are, then you're just saying a minus b, and then a plus b equal to 0. And that, of course, would be your step 1 answer. And your step 2 is just isolating those parentheses and setting them equal to 0. 3x minus 8 equals 0, or 3x plus 8 equals 0. Add 8. Divide 3. Subtract 8 on the right. 8 minus 8 is 0, so we've got 3x equals negative 8, and then divide 3. X equals negative 8 thirds.